Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Masterclass on day 3 of Target Elevate 2021. I'm Rachel Whitcomb, VP of Technology at Target, and I hope you've been having as great a week at Target Elevate as I have. Some of you might have heard my story last year at Elevate. Following a trail blazed by extraordinary women and supported at every step of the way by a tribe of strong and inspiring women, I am now a lifetime technologist, a working mom of 4, an adventurous spirit, and a continuous learner. And yes, you might have heard in the opening, I really do think I have it all, or at the very least, that I have enough. Last year, I was in India for this great event, and today I join you an equally inspiring event from my home. And here I am truly honored to be introducing you to a woman who is living the standard, standing for what she believes in, living her values, and bringing change for good by pursuing her ideas. Ethics in technology, data privacy, and using technology for good, these are issues that affect all of us in this day and age. Our speaker today has tackled these head on as a woman who co-founded a nonprofit called the Humanized Internet, which works to provide and safeguard digital identities for underserved individuals. Her ideas have helped harness a world of social good enabled by technology and embedded ethics. These ideas have also brought about a wave of change in areas like education, healthcare, and insurance. She believes that by making the internet safer, we can turn it into a space that reinforces progress and helps people make their lives better. For all that she has done and for all the wisdom she has discovered and can share, I am just thrilled to introduce you to our speaker today, Monique Morrow. Monique is president of the Humanized Internet and senior distinguished architect for emerging technologies at Cineverse. As a woman in technology, we all know the road is not always smooth. We need skills, we need support, we need resilience, and we need persistence. And I'm eager to hear Monique as she shares with us a bit of her journey, her advice, and more. Over to you, Monique.
So welcome to the Masterclass on the art of persistence for women in tech and why tech for good is essential for business. We're going to tackle the top 3 themes in this masterclass. Specifically, what does it mean to create the art of persistence for women in tech? Also developing the portfolio that is very essential for a woman in tech. And lastly, how we can and should embed social good in your technical infrastructure and your technologies, and why this is so important and core to ethical business. So when we look at the art of persistence, I'd like to make the story a little bit personal from my perspective. And that is, first and foremost, when you see a picture, you kind of embed, what does your journey or what can your journey look like as you pursue this technology career. And when I think about the art of persistence specifically, the art of persistence has to start with your own personal experiences. And in my case, my own personal experience is that persistence meant for me that as a child, I was a stutterer. And it was very difficult, and you can imagine very difficult still, to speak in front of an audience and speak in front of people overall. But as a child, as a stutterer, one could imagine what it meant to be in a school with kids and sometimes being made fun of. So, having a great family helped me in tackling this particular condition, if you want to call it that, and also to be persistent. And I think that is what persistence means as a personal, endeavor, if you will. I'm going to pause in a moment because, it starts with you. And one of the things that is very key in this narrative of persistence is that you need to think about, as a woman in tech, the courage to go left when others are going right. Also to be true to your authentic self, and know, and this is a very difficult problem, or usually a scenario, know specifically when to move on. The other characteristic in this particular situation when we talk about women in tech and persistent is that it's not a zero-sum game. This is not about winners and losers at the end of the day. I also will argue that your career is not always a ladder. I believe that whatever you do, there will be pivots, and what we call pivots, along the way. And this journey of the art of persistence, particularly for a woman in tech. One point that I do want to state is that even though in my career I have seen and experienced these sorts of pivots, I have embarked and chosen to embark as a woman in tech, the technology ladder. And I hate to use the term ladder because that always has sort of the picture of a person climbing. And yes, there will be a climb, but it will be sort of a circular climb, if you will. So, being persistent and starting out with your own experiences, as I stated before, is not a zero-sum game. When you think about the courage to go left when others are going right, what image does that evoke in your mind? The courage to go left when others are going right. That is, for example, you could be, and often are, in a room of decision makers, and there are individuals arguing for a particular position that you may not be in agreement with. Or there may be a scenario that it may very well impact the business overall. Do you speak up? Do you actually decide to move on? How does that look for you? And it's very difficult when you're a developer to suggest that you want to go left when others are going right. But it also means and evokes this connotation of doing the right thing. And doing the right thing is very, very, it takes courage. So think about it when you are in a meeting. What does that look like? Who is the moderator of the meeting? Is the moderator assuring, for example, that you have your voice? Is your voice being captured? But moving left when others are moving right doesn't, it's an art, and that's the art of persistence. When I speak about this particular example, it doesn't mean that you throw up your hands and you say, "Look, I'm going to quit the company." Not at all. Not at all. It also means that you have to think about what it means to take a stand, and take a stand as particularly a woman in tech, and to assert it, to go on record for that. And I think that's one that is very, very essential to the art of persistence. I'm going to take a pause here because many people ask me, Monique, you were a distinguished engineer at Cisco, you became a CTO, you're a woman in tech and the overall, the world, the industry. What did that look like for you? Well, it is true. I was one of the first female women, engineers, distinguished engineers, in the company. And I was, put into a group, if you can imagine, of all kinds of valedictorians and very, very A-type behavior. I was very honored and thrilled to be that distinguished, one of the first women. I believe I was the first woman distinguished engineer, particularly in the services organization at Cisco. And it was a thrill. But you have to think about, and a distinguished engineer, it means that you are a senior director and you hold a level of responsibility. I remember when I was informed of my promotion, I was in Singapore at the time. And my next question was, what's after that? I wasn't relishing, this is an example that you have to think about. You have to relish in that moment. You have been chosen by your peers. You have been chosen by the entire organization, which is extremely difficult. And it so happens that the next level would have been is a fellow, which is equivalent to a senior vice president. And then, of course, you become a CTO, which is more business oriented. There's a technology levers, but there's a business aspect to it. So as a distinguished engineer, one thing that you need to know, again, along this journey of persistence, you need to know that you start to carry a responsibility. You start to carry a responsibility that's heavily weighted technically, but also start as you move up, or as you move forward in your technical career, there will become a very large emphasis on the business aspects. And how does what these technologies produce impact the business overall? How does it impact your relationships or your customer relationships or your ecosystem of players relationships? So again, being a distinguished engineer, moving forward in my own persistent journey has been a thrill. But on the other hand, it carries much more responsibility, and I think it's extremely pivotal for you to know that responsibility is very, very critical. And in fact, you need to also think about how you give back to your peers in the organization. How do you nurture or think about mentoring, if you will, because mentorship is a very key component of this journey. Other developers, how do you mentor other technologists? How do you mentor your peers, not only in the organization but also in the industry overall? And that mentorship becomes extremely important. For me, I mentor both women and men. And I mentor both women and men in the industry. And it's also, I also have a personal coach with whom I work every day. And that's important because when I was at the company, when I was at Cisco, for example, coaching became a very, very key component of our development process, and I've carried that coaching experience with me overall. So again, this is an area that you can think about in this particular art of persistence. Again, thinking about how you mentor, how do you coach, what does it mean to be distinguished, what does it mean to move in these ladders, what is the impact to business overall. The courage to go left, to go left when others go right, is an important courage for us to undertake, if you will. And again, I've had my own personal story has been exactly that. What I talk about with you today is that courage to go left when others are going right. To be able to say, for example, I have to move on to another project. It's not going anywhere. That is the courage to go left, then going right. And I've had those experiences. For example, to be able to say, even though I have so much intellectual and also emotional investment into this entire experience, I think that I need to know when to give it up. And that goes hand in hand, this notion of being able to give up, projects when you know that they are not moving forward. So that is to be the art of persistence goes into that direction. The other component here, which is really critical, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is where the magic happens in your career as a woman in tech. And, again, bolting it and relating it to persistence, where the magic happens is actually out of your comfort zone. And to be able to move out of your comfort zone is really, really, really very, very important. I used to have a coach who would tell me, if you don't, he was mainly in the entertainment business, but fundamentally told me, if you don't move yourself, or if you don't write a script, a script will be written for you and you may not like it. And this is constantly true. And it is true for me to this day. You absolutely need to think about what does it mean to move out of your comfort zone? I think about it, and I've done it constantly. That is, for example, when you are comfortable doing what you're doing, then you should consider that a red flag. My personal career has taken me across various aspects of the organization itself, and that is to go, for example, if you're in the development and tech part of the organization, do you go into another part? Do you go into sales? Do you go into trying to understand it, for example? Do you go into a services component? Or what are you learning? What are you learning constantly? It's not just about training that a company owes you training. It's about what are you learning. I personally believe in lifelong learning, and having recently received a master's degree in blockchain, for example, I believe in that. I live that. And so living out of your comfort zone is really, and experiencing it every day is very, very pivotal in this particular discussion. So, I do think, for example, that you can look at the change that needs to happen internally for you. I wouldn't wait, for example, for an organization to impart that change. Usually when that happens, it's a bit late. You have to raise your hand, for example, to take on very tough projects. You have to raise your hand, for example, to look at other aspects that of a particular part of your technology set that needs to be addressed, that isn't addressed, and perhaps raise the case for it. And these are the types of activities that need to happen. In my particular case, for example, I was asked to take on a leadership role in Asia Pacific, and that led me out of Switzerland in a hybrid assignment to Hong Kong, where I had to work mainly in the entire Asia Pacific region. That included India, that included China, that included Australia and New Zealand and Japan. It was half the world. And for me, that was really moving out of my comfort zone. Why? Because I came out of a research and development component of my organization and went into the region, which was mainly sales and services, although I had a technology responsibility and to look at how these technologies, for example, could enable a business. And it was extremely daunting for me to have stepped out of a comfort zone that was, I could have gone on and just been happy in the research part of my organization. But in fact, I did move across the organization. I moved out of research. I moved into the sales and field in Asia Pacific, and I moved into, for example, into the services organization. To understand the business of your organization, of your company, is extremely important for technologists, for women in tech especially. And I do want to say something very, very important into this particular discussion. It is not that women are never, ever, ever put yourself as a victim. The organization has to be able to be an enabler into your career. Often what we find, and often research has found it too, that women are trying to fit into an organization that was not or has not been structured for them. There's a corpus of a body, if you will, of research suggesting that has been the case. And in fact, what it is that when women, and here's a fact, when women actually move away from the company, when they give up for good, because they're trying to manage. It's a complex topic, and it's cultural. They're trying to manage a household. They're trying to manage. They're trying to manage their own career. They're trying to manage a plethora of complexity. And so we have to think about what is the loss of talent when a woman gives up for good? And so what does that mean for the industry? And how can we as technologists and as enablers be able to address these particular issues? So women should not, for example, women in tech should not put themselves particularly as victims when we talk about this particular topic. So again, it is to be able to think about, is your organization as a technologist, as a woman in tech, and particularly, are you set up and reflective of the society you live in? I think the other component of this persistence discussion, the art of persistence, is to think about not losing the authentic you in the process. You don't have to learn the jargon of athletics. You don't have to do that. And networking, of course, is different between men as they are and women. Men typically have they have other events that they go to, or they typically rally around sports, whether it's golfing and so on, or it's very difficult often for women to network. And I think that here the networking has to be built amongst ourselves with women, and I think women in tech specifically. It doesn't mean that you go to a restaurant and so on. It's about how you build that network together, because it's important to do that. The networking, again, we have data that suggests between the way men network and in tech and between the way women network are far different. And so we need to think about, how do we as women in tech build up that network capability, the networking capability. And I have seen and experienced a lot of fantastic ways to do that. Maybe it is kind of meeting together over a weekend. Maybe it is kind of meeting together over events in various contexts. I think it's going to be different, and it's going to be culturally, let's say, different also. But it's important that you think about what that networking is, because sometimes women operate in very, very, I think silos, and we see that overall in the industry. I think also for men, it's important to note, if a woman is not involved in your technical discussions, if a woman is not involved in development, then that should be a red flag for you, because this gets into what we call the diversity of thought and diversity of mindset. In my own experience, for example, when I listen to pitches, because I'm also in the startup world, I will also go to the person who's most quiet, because you have to be able to be inclusive in the conversation itself. So it's very important to think about, do you, as developers, have diversity of mindset? Do you have diversity overall? And I think that's something that we, as a technologist, need to think very, very carefully about. Because if you're not, it's going to be a red flag, and it certainly is a red flag in the industry. In fact, you will see in sometimes conferences where if there's not diversity in that conference set, if there's not diversity in a panel, especially for a technologist and especially for women in tech, usually the panel will not go forward. So it's really, really critical that we as an industry think about that overall, in terms of what does diversity of mindset look like as developers, as technologists, and particularly as women in tech. And I think that's very, very, very key. So once again, don't lose your authentic self. You need to know also when to move on, because when to move on is a very, very fine art. And that goes hand in hand with when to go left when people are going right. Some people, when they move on, they may agree to disagree and move on, or some are actually decide to depart the organization or depart the company and so on. But it's very important. It's not specifically for women in tech, but it's specifically an area that we have to think about in the industry itself. One very, very important point is you need to be, and we all need to be, generous with our peers. You never know where you're going to end up. Even if you depart an organization, even if you depart the company, always be generous with your peers. It's very important to do that because, this is a small world. As a woman in tech, it's a very small world. And being generous is always, very, very key as a behavior that should always be with you. And I think that's not just specific for women in tech, but particularly for people overall. It's just being generous with your peers. And that means if you have a problem, and if you have a problem with me, if I have a problem with you, tell me. Don't tell everybody else. I don't want to be the last to hear about it. So that's really very, very key. If I have a problem with somebody, I will pull them to the side, and we can dialogue about it, discuss it, and vice versa. That is I encourage the latter. If somebody has a problem with me, I encourage that discussion occur also transparently, because you don't want to be the last to know. And it's also about transparency in our communications. I will say this, that it's a great time to be a woman in tech. It's a great time to be in tech overall. But again, this is just the beginning of what we call persistence. I think the other component here is looking at how we think about the technologies. And I'm in emerging technologies overall. I believe that tech for good should be embedded in our business models. It just makes sense to do so. For example, when you have a tech for good model, you're actually looking at how that tech for good is going to benefit society overall. And so, for example, technology has no agency. But when you're a developer, when you're developing something, you have to think about, okay, what is the potential for abuse? There's always this polarity. What does abuse particularly could look like? And that is, I think, when we think about the Internet of Things, when we think about identification, things talking to things, the potential for abuse can be high. These are some very, very key issues that we have to think about. And so I'm excited as a woman in tech and emerging technologies, but I'm more excited about building tech for good. So I also work in the community, not only in the startup community, but I look at how, for example, people in our society can benefit from a tech for good model. A tech for good model benefits the industry overall, but it also, it's giving back, and you have to think about what that looks like. So, for example, there are areas that I particularly am very focused in. These are the areas of cybersecurity. It's very, very fundamental in anything we do, because this goes to the dialogue of lost in trust, in brand. So security is fundamental. Cybersecurity is fundamental. And learning more about cybersecurity is going to be really key, because then I get into the topic of quantum resistant security. The other component here is blockchain. Blockchain is very, very, I think it's past I do believe blockchain is past the area where people were sort of thinking about it, as an experiment. And now we're looking at it as going mainstream and adopted by many large enterprises. But for me, the example of tech for good and blockchain is really the low-hanging fruit around credentialing and identity. For example, my degree was credentialed on the blockchain, and so I can look it up, such that if the organization were to not exist anymore, the credentialing organization, I always will have a reference that is in the blockchain forever. There's a cryptographic key that has been given back to me, right? And so I think credentialing is one aspect, credentialing in your careers, credentialing for people who don't have credentials. Think about migrant workers. That's an example of giving back and looking at how you use a technology like blockchain to do that. I also think that self-sovereign identity, or SSI, is another area, because now you're looking at decentralized identity sets. And particularly important when we think about the Internet of Things. Again, giving back a tech for good example is that these are immutability, capabilities. You take them with you. Think about visually what a digital lockbox can look like. There are examples of SSI developing not only in open source software, whether they are the Hyperledger sets or self-sovereign identity in Sovereign, or in Hedera, which is looking at how you tokenize assets overall. So you can imagine, if you will, what a tech for good model can be using these particular technology sets. But moreover, what is really exciting is how you can actually start to pivot in this space, learning these sets of technologies, how they can impact your business. And I think this for me is really the promise of tech for good with these particularly emerging sets of technologies. As I said before, security, cybersecurity is so foundational. There's so many things happening in that security space, and you have to think about, where is the exposure? What does the threat model look like? And especially when we're thinking about 5G, the vulnerability surfaces, and so on and so forth. So if you detect a bit of passion in my voice, particularly around tech for good, and also these emerging technology sets, yes, of course I'm excited. And this is the most important point that I want to say, why it's great to be a woman in tech, why it's great to be, have that persistence and developing your portfolio along the way. When I mentor, it's all about your portfolio. What does that look like? And you keep it, and you take it wherever you go. That's the promise of today, but more or less, that's the promise of tomorrow. So, think about what a better world can look like for everyone. When you are a woman in tech, you're persistent and you're using these great technologies to do for good and to impart with humanity a social good model, because it makes business sense to do so. And lastly, but not least, I think it's very, very important for you to continue your learning process always, because your career will pivot. I assure you that it will. And I'm excited for you, and I'm excited to be working with you. Thank you very much.
Monique, I am always so moved to hear women speaking about their lived experience, and I'm just awed by the courage and the consistency and strength that you exude as you're telling your story. And there's just so many good insights to pull out of your words. I want to just jump right in and ask a few questions about some of the things that you shared with us today. First, I
First of all,
really
Rachel,
connect. Oh
I was
yeah,
going to say,
go ahead.
first of all, I wish I were live in India with
Oh,
everyone. But thank you so much for this wonderful, wonderful invitation. It's so exciting. So, yeah, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to break down here. That's
well,
looking
we're
forward
so
to the
happy to have
questions.
you here, and someday maybe we'll meet in India and get to have
Sure,
share some more thoughts over coffee or tea.
absolutely.
First, Monique, I really connected with your words about career thinking and recognizing that your career is not a ladder, but it's a series of pivots or a portfolio of experiences. And for me, this was particularly resonant because it took me a bit of time to come to even really understand who and what I wanted to be, both professionally and personally. So I wonder about what advice you'd give for women who are earlier in their process and considering the pivots in front of them, and whether you had a litmus test or how you made decisions when you didn't necessarily have a strong connection to a North Star for yourself yet.
Oh, well, that's a great question, Rachel. Well, indeed, I mean, it goes to, well, first and foremost, I have to state that the relationship between you and your manager is going to be very critical in all of these sort of these discussions. I'll put that in the background because that's the reality. Um, for me, I was always looking at how to solve a problem. I was never thinking about, I was never in my earlier, never thinking about, oh my God, what's the promotion going to look like? I was so intrigued by the problem set itself. But that's one aspect of it. However, here's the thing that I've learned. There's learnings, and hindsight is always 2020. One aspect is, to take on, I said, take on some of these difficult projects or raise your hand. but with caution. Do not take the project nobody wants, right? Because you're going to be measured, and that's typically what has happened for women in tech. You're measured on a different scale. And so if nobody wanted that project, even though it seems like you're saving the day, etc., stay away from it, or pose questions about what does success look like, and so on and so forth, and understand why nobody wanted it in the first place. That's an important, for me, when we talk about litmus tests for decisions, that's one aspect that has stood out and would stand out if I were starting my career over again.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I think you're absolutely right. Many of us are sort of natural caregivers who want to save the day and help. And we need to remember that sometimes that helping in the short term doesn't serve the long-term purpose we intend.
Correct.
Well, I see a number of questions coming in still. So while we're collecting those, I have a couple more of my own. So
Sure.
I'll selfishly take a little bit more time.
Mm-hmm.
A purpose of Target's Elevate conference is creating a tribe of women in technology. And those are words I just really love. You spoke a little bit in your words about the importance of mentors and also of mentoring, especially when you're weighing that, take the route to the left when others are going right. What characteristics have you seen make the most valuable mentorship relationships for you, whether as the mentor or the mentee?
For me, I think one of the most valuable is about the portfolio, keeping your portfolio and understanding your brand. Earlier in my career, I didn't know what that meant. What does that mean? I mean, especially if you're a technologist engineer, what does it mean, your brand? But understanding it from a portfolio perspective is very, very key. I just had a colleague in the industry came to me and he said, I would like for you to mentor me, but it's more or less, what are the goals? It's a two-way street. When I'm mentoring somebody, it's a two-way street of understanding the goals. What does your portfolio look like? What does success look like for you? Because you're taking a piece of your shelf time to actually provide that interaction. And being mentored, I will have to say very candidly, men were my biggest mentors earlier because, we didn't have any. We didn't have any women really examples in the industry. We have plenty now. I have to say, plenty now. And they're fantastic, but it was very, very difficult. The way men mentored me was very interesting in itself because it was really pushing my confidence level, right? Get your confidence level up, because we tend to be, as women in technology, we tend to be perfectionists. We're not going to put our hand up for a promotion, or we're not going to. So it's really pushing the confidence level and being forthcoming in the project, such that I started to have that two-way interaction. So portfolio, what does it look? Carry it with you wherever you go. I have just received some wonderful acknowledgments from women particularly people who I mentored, who actually ended up getting promotions. Not that was the goal, but it ended up being the case for them, which is quite nice.
That's wonderful. Well, building a little bit on your comments about confidence, another phrase you use that I just really immediately connected with me is that you said that we each need to find where the magic happens.
Mhm.
And we need to take some control over that by creating our own magic and stepping outside of our comfort zone. You just spoke a little bit more about confidence, but I think that is a challenge for many of us. And so I'm wondering about any advice you might have for women who are considering new challenges, and what are your tools or routines or self-talk, or how do you bolster your confidence when you're taking that leap of courage?
Well, this is contextual when we talk about the comfort zone. It's very contextual. So I will say that. One of the things that I always say is take the dive and enjoy it. is an aspect to it. Look, it's really basically the indicator for me is when you're very comfortable, it's a red flag. When you're really comfortable, it's a red flag. And so it's mainly thinking about, maybe that's a sign for your own growth, require that you need to grow and you want to grow. Maybe it's in a different direction. So that's always a particular case. I've always sort of raised on a personal level, Rachel, I've always raised my hand, I'll go ahead and do this. But again, you have to think about, and here's a lesson learned for me. What does success look like? What are the KPI? What are the metrics? It may look very, very attractive. By the way, going to Asia Pacific, I said, oh yes, but nobody told me, I didn't even think to ask, what were the KPIs for success? What kind of team did I really need to have? And so I was hitting my head. I will say that was rich in learning, but I encountered a lot of interesting dynamics that, from a learning perspective, you have to be able to ask what are the KPIs for success? What is that going to look like? What is going to make me successful in that role? And if you don't ask that question, even though it may look attractive, please, please, please be careful. Do that. Ask the question and not be comfortable in the role that you're at this point in time. Learning aspects of other parts of the business or other parts of the industry is really, really helpful.
Yeah. Well, as a fellow continuous learner, I second that for sure. I'd love to invite one of our audience members to pose a question to you. So, Archana Kulkarni, could you turn on your video and ask your question for Monique?
Hi. Good morning, Monique. I guess it's very early morning for you.
It's afternoon. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was a great session, motivational one, and very inspiring. Lot of takeaways. Well, I have one question here. Just help me understand or help us understand what are the 5 important tips to a working woman, which are helpful, for us to move up in the ladder, or to move to the executive level or the top management level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. That's actually a wonderful question, Achana. One of the things here is people ask for 5. I always think of 3 because 3 people can remember, but I'll go for 5. It's okay. I'll do 5. First of all, when you want to go up the management executive level, one of the things to think about is, what are the trade-offs? Why do you want to do that? Understand that. What are the trade-offs? Because now you become a people manager, right? So there's some, if you look, so you have to balance that. There's the technology aspect, but there's the trade-offs on understanding that with people management. Personally, I don't want to be a people manager. I'll just let you know that now right off the bat, because I understand the trade-offs for me. What are the best use of my strengths, my personal strengths? Understand why. What's your goal? That's number 2. What's your goal? So for example, I'm mentoring a man and his goal is to be a CEO. He's very clear. I want to be a CEO, so that's his goal, right? The other one is get early. Number 3 is get involved in a mentor coaching relationship earlier, whether it's with wonderful people in the company or outside the industry or a combination of both. That's very important, because that's also going to be part of challenging you in your dialogue about getting into the executive suite. And by the way, the executive suite is it's very important because you have leverage into decisions into the company. The other component here, number 4, is I'll repeat myself, but what does success look like for you? What does it look like for you? And be agile, be flexible. You could be changing, okay? On a personal level, those are 5, right? Understand your trade-offs, understand why, what is your goal? Get mentoring, coaching very early. At Cisco, we had a coaching program, so that's very important. It's structured, it still exists. And I took my personal coach with me, so that's one. Also, what does success look like for you? And be flexible and agile. I will say this, in my current role, for example, in Cineverse, what I've been doing is I've been involved, even though I'm not a people manager, because that's not the best use of me. I know how I use myself. However, I've been very involved in defining the technical strategy of the company. And that goes across the organization, right? So you're involved with the CIO, the CEO, and so on. That's very, very important to do that. So I think those are the 5 important tips I would say to a working woman that could help them if you really want to move to management executive level, and I think the most important, I know this is said often, but I'm really truly meaning it, is to have fun in the process and be able to think that you can change your mind if you want to.
Wonderful. Well, Monique, I want to next invite Dolly Krishnappa to come and ask her question, because she has a question that I've seen echoed in a number of comments in the chat. So Dolly, could you turn on your video and ask your question?
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, Monique.
Hi, Dolly.
Is what advice or tips you would give to the women in technology to keep up with all the things happening in the space? There's so many things happening, so many new technologies. How do you go about constantly upscaling yourself so that you stay relevant and up to date, and upscale on the technologies? Yeah.
Well, very fantastic question. So, and often asked. Look, learning is lifelong, as if you know. So that's one thing I've always stated. Don't depend on the company for you to train you. You learn something, right, in that area. So, looking at what certifications do I need to I talked about cybersecurity. So when you leave, are you going to be certified in cybersecurity, for example? What do those certifications look like? Challenging yourself on that is really very key. The other component is I work with a colleague and we look at how many books we're reading. So I have some books, right? Like, so those are another one. So the books, there's a lot of great and interesting in podcasting. The sky's the limit here. The books, of course we have the tech magazines, etc. Do you start writing? Do you start saying, I want to co-publish an article? I want to co-publish something? That's very, very important. So some books that I have, actually, I think I put it down for some of your reading, one is called Surrounded by Idiots. Surrounded by Idiots. This is one that tells you about, what kind of A types, B types, what are the people, how do you recognize them, and how do you actually adjust your behavior? That's a great one. The one for our developers is, especially for those who are developing and knowing ethics, is called The Ethical Algorithm. So that's another one to take a look at. I look at Simon Sinek, The Long Game. There's a lot of, so those are the things that, I have a lot of reading. I challenge myself to. If I believe that the industry is going in a particular direction, being when you're working full time and you've got family obligations and so on, I'll go off and get a degree if it needs to be a degree on top of it. But it's hard. That's not to say that you should do that. But look, you have to keep up in the sense of getting involved in projects, and I think that's one way. Getting involved. You as the tribe of powerful women and Elevate and Target, you're sitting on a gold mine of possibilities. I can't help but stress that. A gold mine of possibilities. So those are the types of things that those are the types of steps I would actually recommend. Hopefully I've answered your question. If I haven't, to your satisfaction, let me know.
Thank you, Dolly, for your question, and Monique for your thoughts and for sharing your book list. I added to my reading list. I'd like to invite one more audience member forward. Tanushree Mondal, can you turn on your video and ask your question for Monique?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So firstly, thank you, Monique, for such an inspiring session. So my question for you is, how do one overcome the fear of failure?
Oh, okay. That's a really great question, because to be honest, people are not interested in your accomplishment insofar as they're interested in how you overcame a lot of challenges, in your in the process. In fact, at the Technical University of Zurich, what they have is they had something called, which is kind of similar to IIT in India, the IIT. They have something called, it's a program basically to stand up in front of 2,000-3,000 people to talk about when you failed. Now, I will couch failure, because failure is like, oh my God, we're used to getting we're used to getting great grades, etc. Well, let me make that note personal, because that's what I was asked to do. right? And that is, think about Cisco. I was in a very nice company, and I had a chance to join Cisco in 2000, October 1st, 2000. But March in 2000, the stock options were like $82 or $85 a share or whatever. And let's say this is a time of the .com bust or whatever, the bubble. When I joined Cisco on October 1st, everything was underwater, and Cisco was about ready to signal their first layoffs in its history. In fact, the entire group that I was in was dissolved, right? So that was like, well, and still you had to look at, this is where you this is why networking is very important. This is when you say, okay, I'm going to throw out my lifeline to another part of the organization. And that's what happened, right? And so I was able to get into the CTO's group. So when you're talking about, overcoming failure, you have to be in an organization to allow for these situations where maybe something has been developed, it's not making it. And you're allowed to be able to change a direction and be able to do so without any let's say repercussions to you as an employee or repercussions to the organization. We sometimes say fail fast, but you know what? Show me where people are actually rewarded for that. So there's a company, there's quite a few companies. I think I was Google X, one of my colleagues in the industry at the company. They have something where they celebrate, they call it Dia de la Muerta, meaning in Spanish, it's the death, you bring a project down and you're actually promoted. You're actually promoted. We don't do a good job on that, right? It's time now. Imagine I go to Rachel and say, Rachel, I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to bring this project down, and you get a promotion for that, right? That's the thing that you have to think about, especially if it's taking so many resources, so much of Rachel's resources, so much of the organization's resources. Those are the types of things we have to think about and celebrate the fact that we did it. And that would be, celebrating I hate to say sort of a failure, but putting a sun on it and said, you know what? I took it out of my comfort zone. All right. Didn't work out. Okay. Move on.
Totally agree with you, Monique,
good.
and thank you for your question. I mean, we just learned so much more when we kind of embrace those failures. As we come to the end of our time today, I just want to remind all of our participants that we would love to hear from all of you on how you found this session. You just see in the chat a link coming up where you can share your views with us. But with just a few minutes left, I want to just summarize a little bit and take just a few highlights of what I'm going to walk away from this session with, and just then extend a really heartfelt thanks to you, Monique. So
thank you.
Again, I really appreciate your insights. And I have to say, I hope it's not too personal to share. I also really appreciate you taking a small bit of your birthday to share with us. Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
We're glad to celebrate a little bit of that with you. As I summarize just this session, here's a few things that just really are sticking loud in my mind and that I'm going to carry forward and think about even a bit more. Careers are made of a portfolio of experiences. They're not a linear ladder. We can and should be persistent and make choices and step outside our comfort zone to be where the magic happens. You should always be your authentic self and back that self with supported mentors so you can feel comfortable going left when others are going right. And most importantly, know when to move on. And finally, it is possible to create and build tech for good with integrity and privacy and ethics guiding our decisions. And we, as women in technology, we can be key to providing the right perspective to drive that very most good. I have greatly appreciated getting to hear from you today and learn from you, Monique. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our participants for the great questions and engagement today. Be well, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.